Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. I am super excited to share this series with you guys. This is probably one of my favorites. It's definitely a comfort read for me. I read this about once a month. So yes, definitely very excited to kind of share this. So this is a Japanese manga. It is only 9 chapters, super sad. I wish it was longer. I would take like 10 stories like this personally. But yeah, it's called Collar Kiss. It is a Dom sub verse style of story, and it deals with some tags surrounding rape, sexual, physical, and verbal abuse. These tags are kind of more inexplicitly hinted at based off of trauma in the character's background. So you don't really see any of this stuff. It's just, again, it's more of how it shaped their character leading up to where they are. So this is definitely a series that is safe to read. However, if these kinds of tags trigger you, then I definitely don't recommend it. However, for those who do like stories like this, with a little bit more of a complex personality, I highly, highly recommend this series. So, just to start off, you have your main character. His name is Miki, and he is a sub. So, when you're dealing with these kinds of subverses, you typically have DOMs and subs. However, this story in particular actually includes a switch. And this switch is essentially somebody who will switch between sub and dom depending on whom they're around. So if a switch is around a dom, they become a sub, and if the switch is around a sub, they become a dom. So this in particular would be Miki's partner Haga, and Haga is a switch. So since Haga being a switch is dating Miki, who is a sub, Haga looks like a dom to Miki. I just want to make that clear because it kind of plays into the story a little bit later. But yes, so that's kind of just how these characters are kind of laid out. So both Miki and Haga have trauma, of course, based off of their sex. And for Haga, it was specifically coming across Dom kids in high school who would make him a sub and who would unfortunately rape him. And this really, really shaped Haga's kind of personality. It led him to being having more a little bit more of a toxic personality. He really bought into sub dom stereotypes to an extreme in a really unhealthy way, and this kind of leads him to treating Miki a little bit poorly. um as for Miki, Miki also has trauma. He was raped as a kid in high school as well for being a sub because he had dom classmates. So Haga works a classic 9 to 5 job. He's a switch. It doesn't necessarily impact him. However, Miki does not work, and that's surrounding because he is a sub. So, what Miki ends up doing is he works as a nanny, essentially. He takes these kinds of day gigs for various families. He typically works for normal people, which are people that don't have a second sex. So, the story starts off with Miki just kind of visiting a local bookstore. He's looking into novels by his favorite author, and this author likes to write healthy dom sub stories. So, just your classic kind of romance. Miki implies in this scene that a lot of the time, doms and subs don't necessarily see eye to eye on things and aren't always treated equally. And he also kind of implies that doms typically dominate the relationship or the dynamic. And this has kind of led Miki to having a negative taste when it comes to doms. He doesn't necessarily hate them, but he is definitely weary of doms for the most part. So when Miki ends up taking this babysitting job for a dom named Moriya and his younger daughter named Shiori, he starts to freak out when he shows up at their house, and Moriya kind of says over the intercom saying, "Come in," and automatically Miki's body responds and he starts freaking out because he realizes that Moriya is a dom. However, Miki just kind of comes in. Moriya shoves Shiori to Miki and says that he's running late on a deadline and that he's really grateful that Miki's going to take care of Shiori. So time passes, Miki and Shiori kind of get acquainted. It's super cute interactions. Shiori is like kind of like this dark horse in this story where she is playing a huge role into these two ending up getting together. So their interactions are super cute, but as the evening kind of rolls around, Miki puts Shiori down for bed and starts roaming Moriya's house. And that's when he discovers this kind of like library room, and he realizes that the bookshelf is full of stories that he's like obsessed with. Essentially, Miki kind of discovers that, wow, this person is really into the same kind of stories that I like. It's these healthy dom sub kind of like romantic novels. And while Miki ends up finding a novel that he hasn't read before, he kind of like lays down on the couch and starts jerking off to the contents of the novel. And eventually he kind of starts to produce like this pheromone scent. And this leads Moriya to walking into this library study like kind of room. And he starts asking Miki if he likes the book. And Mickey's like super caught off guard, starts apologizing. Like he kind of realized that he really messed up in this kind of situation. But Moriya was like, no, 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 just tell me if you like these books. And Miki ends up confessing that this is his favorite author. And Moriya starts freaking out because he is the author of these novels. So Moriya starts essentially playing 20 questions with Miki and asking him, like, it's so cool to meet a fan, and asking him what he thinks about his novels. And of course, Miki gives like glowing reviews because he's just happy that there is somebody out there writing a bit more of an equal footing romance novels about doms and subs. And so, of course, they end up fooling around a little bit, and they get a little bit too far when Moriya ends up touching Miki's collar. And so Miki ends up freaking out and runs out of the house and kind of just goes home. However, Miki does in fact come back the next day, and Shiori is like super excited to see him. And she is like super giddy and super happy to see him. And so they, of course, end up spending the day together again. They ended up falling asleep, all three of them together. So you can kind of imagine Miki laying on the bed on the ground, and Shiori is kind of in the middle between Miki and Moriya. And it is super, super cute. It is an absolutely adorable scene. And while Miki is kind of sleeping through the night, he ends up having this like erotic dream about Moriya essentially confessing his love for him, having sex with him, taking the collar of off his neck. And so when Miki ends up waking up the next day, he kind of walks out and he ends up meeting Moriya's co-worker, Nikawa. And Nikawa is also a dom. And so Moriya and Nikawa are kind of discussing the deadline for his next manuscript, which would be one of his newer novels that are going to be coming out. And while Miki ends up walking out, he kind of freaks out because his coworker is there and immediately tries to run away because Nikawa is trying to kind of tease Moriya about having a partner and his partner now being a sub and things like that. However, as Miki is trying to leave, he realizes that Haga is actually also at the door, and Haga is like not pleased that Miki and Moriya are together in the house. And so Haga takes Miki back to their place, in which he abuses essentially Miki, unfortunately. And Haga kind of goes into a bit of a jealous rage, demanding Miki to know if, like, whether they slept together or not. And Miki, of course, confesses that it never really got that far. And Haga essentially imprisons Miki in their home. And so since that this nanny job was taken over this like app like agency, Miki and Moria actually have no way of communicating. They don't have each other's numbers. They can't kind of communicate over the app because Haga kind of deleted it all and things like that. And so Miki is kind of laying on his bed imprisoned in his home, hoping that Haga just does not come back and take more of his anger out on him. And he starts to fantasize of Moria coming to save him. And so Moria is like thinking that, oh my God, this is the end of our kind of like interaction, until he ends up reading this line in his novel. So Miki and Moria kind of previously got hot and heavy a little bit, but they didn't have sex because Miki ended up stopping it. So Moria was kind of thinking about it, and he was just like, well, I guess I really kind of like crossed the line. To be perfectly clear, Moria was completely respectful the entire time. When Miki told him to stop, he stopped, okay? So don't get the wrong idea about this one, but it was completely consensual and completely respectful. And so Moria is like skimming through his novel, and the safe word that they had when they started their kind of interaction was, I love you. And Miki picked that word because that's what Moria has in his novel. So he starts reading his novel and he realizes that Miki ended up saying the safe word because he was overwhelmed, but he actually did in fact love him. So Moria is now trying to rush to where Miki is to find him before Haga kind of gets there. And so Miki is also there, of course, praying that Moria shows up to save him from his relationship with Haga. And so while Miki is hoping for this, he hears a knock on the door and he opens the door and he realizes that it was Haga. And he was just completely devastated. However, Moria was not far behind, and Moria shows up, and Miki immediately starts running to him and starts crying in his arms and essentially saying, save me from this relationship. And this causes Haga to go into like this huge violent rage where he starts yelling at Miki, saying that you're my sub, you belong with me, we love each other, and all this bullshit that he does not understand at all. Haga is an awful person, in my opinion. Um, and so this kind of leads to Moria like starts shouting at Haga saying, no, you're pretty much a controlling asshole. You're supposed to protect your subs. You should love and trust them, and you should be keeping them safe instead of inflicting pain on them. And this kind of gives Miki the guts to kind of stand up for himself. And he is somehow able to pretty much stand up to Haga and say that I don't love you, I don't trust you, and I don't want to be your partner. And this causes Miki to take off his collar. And Miki's so shocked because he was able to somehow disobey an order coming from a dom, essentially. And this leads, of course, to Miki and Moria living happily ever after, while they can kind of take care of Shiori together. So they end up going back to Moria's house and they essentially just live happily ever after. It is truly one of the cutest stories I have ever read, despite there being kind of like those harsher undertones, and you do get little flashbacks throughout the story. This series was just something that like truly touched my heart, especially when I'm like roaming the internet. I don't really see a lot of people recommending this a lot, and that's kind of what prompted this video. Was I just got so tired of recommending this on Reddit every single time that someone was looking for a dom sub verse. But this story is so cute. I thought Miki was a really cute character. It was kind of interesting to me to have a sub kind of character that went through what Miki went, but didn't kind of come out with this like strong resentment for doms. Usually with stories like this, they're super, super resentful, you know? Like if you just think about like other, even like Omegaverse kind of stories, you definitely get this okay, the Omega has been violated in the past by an alpha, and now the Omega hates alphas. But we kind of got like a really mature character out of Miki. And of course, Moria is like the greenest of greenest flags. You know, they're really, you couldn't ask for a better, sweeter top than Moria. And having his daughter, Shiori, just her cuteness was just something I didn't expect, especially in like the little notes at the end of chapters where you would like see her throwing little fits demanding for her to be able to see Miki and things like that. I don't know. For me, this was like truly one of the most perfect stories I could ask for out of a Japanese manga. So, yeah, that's kind of it. This is just my little review about it and just some of my thoughts on the series. I hope some of you guys do end up going to read the story. Again, it is so totally worth it. But yeah, see you guys in the next video.